Welcome to the Grace-Filled Leader Podcast. Do you want a better work-life balance? Do you get stuck in patterns of perfectionism and people-pleasing? Have you always been an overachiever, but really never felt good enough no matter how much outward success you achieve? Hi, I'm Tanya, a wife, mom, leader, and Jesus lover. For most of my life, I tried to find worthiness through achievement. But no matter how hard I worked or how much I achieved, I never felt like I was enough. I was left burned out, empty, and exhausted. I had no time or energy for myself or my family. I needed balance. I needed peace. I finally started to live like an unconditionally loved daughter of the King, saved by grace. This faith-led podcast will teach you self-care routines and practical leadership strategies to help navigate life and leadership. If you're ready to stop people-pleasing and start living and leading God's way, this podcast is for you. Unbutton your blazer, sister friends. It's time to get after it.
Hello, my friends. Today's going to be a little different. I'm taking a risk. Have really not prepared anything. I'm just going to sit down and have a chat with you, which is not typical. Usually I feel like I have to have things very well prepared to make sure that there's good content to give my listeners. But today was a pretty real example of how our struggles kind of smack us in the face and remind us how the enemy likes to work in our areas of vulnerability. And today led me to think about a topic around setting boundaries and why setting boundaries is sometimes very, very difficult, especially for people like me who tend to be people pleasers and approval seekers and want to avoid conflict, and we don't like letting people down and all of those things. Well, I'm just going to say today has been a struggle. You can probably hear it in my voice, but I'm kind of emotionally wore out after a personal experience I had around setting boundaries and then getting confused about setting boundaries and is it okay to set boundaries and why do I feel guilty when I set a boundary when it comes especially to boundaries around my time and using my time for things that are my own or for my own development or growth or interests. This morning, my husband and I had kind of a falling out, which I'm not happy to say, and I want to be a supportive and respectful and dedicated wife. And he's struggling. He has a lot to balance and a lot on his plate. And he needs support. He needs my support. And he looks for that support and he expects it. And I think for the most part, I've tried to be supportive where I can. And, many times on the weekends, we're not at home. We're up north at our cabin working on remodel projects that have been going on for years. While this first part of the year, I'm taking a couple of classes outside of work and I have a full-time demanding job. So then adding these classes on top of that means that I have less capacity to be a support for him. And I kind of forewarned him. I knew one of these classes in particular is a pretty intense 90-day immersion course, but I want to make sure I get the most of it. I think that it's going to be really helpful to me in my growth in doing this work and serving in a way that I feel like God has called me to serve. However, it is taking a good chunk of my time, and it will take a good chunk of my time this first quarter of the year. I don't think that's been received especially well because I've discovered that the work is such that I can't get it done during the week. I've needed my weekends to catch up and do the homework assignments related to the course. Anyway, we got into it, and instead of being calm and grace-filled and having appropriate conversation, we both got upset. I got emotionally upset and went into the whole ugly cry, and we kind of left the conversation without resolution, and my husband had to leave for the weekend, and I had said I couldn't go, and I sat with that, and I really struggled. I've struggled to concentrate, spent way too much time kind of crying about it, praying about it. Later we did talk and have a calm conversation where I think we both had an opportunity to feel heard. I don't know that it was complete resolution, but it was at least an opportunity to be calm and respectful and communicate our feelings in a more productive way. But during and after the fact, it got me thinking about the fact that in this situation, I've set a boundary around my time in that I've not been able to leave home on the weekends to help him because I've needed the time to finish my homework related to something that's for my personal growth. And I've felt guilt around that and guilt around that boundary because I know that while he's trying not to say so, he's disappointed and he would like my help. And I tend to feel guilty anyway when I set a personal boundary. And why is that? Why is it so hard to feel confident in setting a personal boundary and not feel guilt about it? Other people seem to have no problem saying no problem sticking to their boundaries. But if you're a people pleaser, an approval seeker, like I struggle with being, it is dang hard to set boundaries. I get confused about what is normal, healthy boundaries versus what is being selfish. I get confused about believing that as a Christian, I'm supposed to be servant-minded and serve others and support others and not necessarily put myself first on a regular basis, but put the needs of others first. Well, I truly do believe it's the enemy that uses that confusion and insecurity to make me question what really is kind of a normal, healthy, acceptable boundary to set sometimes. This isn't forever. It's 3 months where I need to say I need this time for myself. Yet I feel like I'm failing as a wife by creating that boundary. So really, where does that come from? When I really look at the feeling that's there, when I sit and I feel it and I think about it, it's a feeling of insignificance. That somehow I'm insignificant and my dreams are insignificant and the work that I want to do seems insignificant. But is that really how God sees me or how God sees the work that I want to do? I don't think so. The Bible tells us that when we accept Jesus, we are a new creation. We are adopted sons and daughters of God. He sees us. He sees Christ when he looks at us. Think about how you see your own children. The depth of love you feel for them. Well, his love for us is incomprehensible at a human level. And when I think about the absolute depth of love that I feel for my children, I can't imagine feeling something stronger than that. And of course, I don't see them as insignificant. And I see them as loved more than anything else I can think of. I would give my life for them. I would give anything for them. Well, imagine that God feels something exponentially stronger for us, something we can't comprehend with our human understanding. So should we feel insignificant and not worth setting a boundary for ourselves if it means pursuing kingdom work? I don't think so. I'm reminded that setting boundaries sometimes might be upsetting to those around us, especially since they're not used to us setting boundaries. They expect a different response. So they might get angry. They might be upset. They might feel hurt. And while I think it's important that we try to mitigate hurt and communicate with positive intent with those we love and not in a selfish, unloving way, it doesn't mean that just because they get upset by a boundary that we set, that the boundary was wrong. I've learned that I need to accept sometimes that it might be the right thing for me to set a boundary. But someone I love might be upset with that boundary, and they get to be. My husband gets to be angry if he chooses to be angry with me about something I can't do or I won't do or a boundary that I set. I don't like sitting with the knowledge that someone I love is angry. I struggle with feelings of rejection or abandonment or the need to fix it. Since I can remember, since I was a child, I've always been someone that feels like regardless of how I feel in a situation or the hurt I might feel, I've always been driven to be the one to apologize and try to make it better because I cannot sit comfortably with the idea that someone is upset with me. I've seen that pattern with my parents. I've seen that pattern with my spouse. I've seen that pattern with my kids. I've certainly seen that pattern with my employees. But I'm learning that I can't always gauge whether or not I'm choosing correctly by the other person's reaction. My gauge needs to be whether or not I'm being obedient to what the Lord calls me to. With that comes a risk that it might be upsetting to others. I don't want to be upsetting. I want everyone to feel that I love them and support them. I want to be there for people. I want to be there for my husband. I want to support him as his wife. I want him to have less stress. I want him to be happier and healthier. But sometimes I just can't carry that burden on my own. I really have to surrender this situation to the Lord. And I need to trust that He'll guide my steps and that He'll help me to see how best to balance all the things while fulfilling the work that He's called me to. So I just pray that the Lord redeems this situation. I pray that if you are hearing this and you can relate, if you struggle to set boundaries or struggle to feel significant enough to set boundaries, that you will hear that you are significant. You are a loved child of God. We should strive to be obedient and be more Christ-like. And in doing that, sometimes people might get upset with the boundaries we set. They get to be upset. They get to feel their feelings. It doesn't mean that it isn't okay to set that boundary. Sister, if you have hung with me to this point in this episode, I want to thank you for your grace and your patience. Thank you for letting me be honest and vulnerable and transparent. I hope that there was a kernel of something in this message that resonates with you. And above all else, I hope you hear a message of God's love and who you are in Christ. Never forget that you are a dearly loved child of God. You are significant.
I pray this episode blessed you, spoke to you, or encouraged you in some way. If so, please share it with a friend and head on over to Apple Podcasts to leave me a written review. That's the only way for me to know if you are enjoying the show. Nothing blesses me more than to hear from you. Also, come on over to our free Facebook community. This is a great place for us to support one another on our faith and leadership journey. You can find the link to the group in the show notes. Now to Him who can do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine, according to His power that is at work within us. Ephesians 3, verse 20. Until next time, my friends, God bless.